So WBZ's Kristina Rex is joining us now because she has been in the courtroom for every minute of the Karen Read trial since things got underway. Kristina, since we're almost 2 weeks through, we thought this would be a good point. After week one, there wasn't enough to talk about, but now that we're almost 2 weeks in, we wanted to stop and first of all, get your overall impression about how things are going so far.
Okay, overall impression about how things are going so far. I think it's safe to say, and probably everyone who's witnessed this case so far would agree, that things are moving very slowly.
Very slowly.
To the point where, we knew that this trial was expected to take 6 to 8 weeks, was the predicted timeline. But it's moving slowly to the point where the judge actually said to the attorneys earlier this week, outside the presence of the jury, she said, essentially, we need to pick up the pace. She said, we're using a lot of these jurors' time. Yeah. We need to stop repetitive evidence and get this case moving along. Actually, I think her direct quote was, move this case along. So, we're learning things about the situation, but it's happening very slowly. There's been a little over 20 witnesses out of a list of like 100.
So we're off to a slow start, first of all.
Yeah.
The protesters that show up every day, they are obeying the buffer zone. They're down the street, right?
They are down the street. They hold their signs and wear their free Karen Read gear down the street in the buffer zone. I think we've talked previously about the kind of technique to skirt the buffer zone a little bit, which is that those who want to stand within it wear pink. They just wear the color pink. It's almost like their code color now.
Right.
And some of those people who have been really, I don't know if leaders is the right word in this free Karen Read movement, they've actually been in the courtroom sitting behind the Read family some of the days this week. I've recognized a couple of those same people who had been outside previously are now in there.
Right. So, and you're there on the steps of the courthouse, right? Near Dedham Square.
Yep.
And what would you say has been Karen Read's overall demeanor?
Karen Read, I'm trying to think of the right word for it.
I thought before the buffer zone was put in place, some days she would come up the steps of the courthouse, there'd be cheering. She would, smile to be pleasant to the people gathered there and wave. She looks a little more serious to me now, a little more.
I think when testimony is actually happening, she sits there in her seat, in the defendant's seat, stone-faced, really listening. She's often just like this, like nodding her head, listening to everything that's happening with a very serious face. In court recesses and outside of the courthouse, she's not, I don't want to say happy because that would be overselling it, but she has that pleasant, friendly vibe that you described from previous hearings. She's certainly not high-fiving people on her way out the courthouse, but even when there's bathroom breaks or anything in court, she immediately turns around and starts chatting with her family socially with a smile on her face. But then as soon as court is in session and those jurors are in the room, she is laser focused on what's happening in front of her.
And we've seen the O'Keefe family obviously crying very often. His mother in the front row. They seem intent on listening, but very emotional.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day. I think that they've really. His mom, John's mom, is the first one to shed a tear when it happens, and it's tough to watch. There's obviously some pretty emotional stuff, but for the most part, like his brother, really. They're very stoic, I think is the word I would use to describe how they are. It's the same group for the O'Keefe family. I know because I've spoken with them in the hallways. They're doing a rotation because they can only fit 10 people in their 2 rows. And so they're doing a rotation. So John's brother and his wife and then John's mom are there every single day. And then otherwise, the group is really rotating out.
What do you want viewers to know about what you've experienced so far? Anything stood out to you?
Yeah, actually,
slow start.
I think what I want viewers to know is, and I've said this when discussing this case as well, is that I think my brand of reporting on this has been, let me tell you what jurors heard today. And an interesting thing about this case has been that so far, even with witnesses where we maybe expect more information than we ultimately get, the jurors don't hear that narrative that we've heard outside of the courthouse leading up to it. So like, for example, today, Christopher Albert took the stand, right? And he's the brother of the homeowner at 34 Fairview. And there's been all these allegations outside of court of the Albert family being so well connected and an alleged cover up. And while the defense tried to get some of that in there and did question him about his connections, The more dramatic or salacious allegations that we hear outside of the courtroom, the jurors aren't getting in there. So this case, it doesn't ultimately get decided on what we've all read online. Right? It gets decided on what they hear.
Court. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is not nearly as salacious as the things that are discussed outside of this courthouse.
Right. We know court hearings are innately dramatic. That's why so many TV shows and movies are made surrounding them. But in real life, you can only prove what you can prove. You can only say what you can say in terms of admissible evidence in court. And the judge keeps things under control and tries to keep things unemotional, right?
Absolutely. And has been. I mean, even today, I think more so than other days, there were a lot of objections from both sides today that the judge had to deal with.
Interesting. Anything else you want us to know about? I know it's hard for reporters, as you say, to get in the morning because there are only a few spaces in the courtroom.
Yeah. If you want to know a little bit of the behind the scenes,
yes, how is that
get
working?
In every day. Okay. So actually, I'll show you where I am. Okay. This ramp right here is, and the entrance to the courthouse is right here. Right. So that is where we line up every day. Only 10 reporters are allowed into the courtroom each day because it's a tiny, tiny courtroom. That's all the room that there is. And the system has kind of just been first come, first serve. Whoever shows up, shows up. I'm very blessed that Penny Commit, our morning reporter, has been here every day. She starts so early in the morning that she does her live shots and then she stands in line and holds my spot. She gets in line and holds my spot till I can get here. But there have been people who got here as early as the night before to make sure they have a spot in line to get inside. So I think we've all started talking amongst ourselves and said, okay, this method is unsustainable. If this trial really goes on for 2 months, we can't be showing up the night before and sleeping on the steps of the courthouse. Right. But it's certainly something that's being worked out right now. And I've been very lucky that I've been in the courtroom every day because not everybody gets in.
That is great. This courtroom is smaller than the initial courtroom.
Much
smaller. So it's resolved that issue of, jurors being able to see witnesses' faces and all of that.
Yeah, they're on a diagonal. So the courtroom, is it okay? Do we have a minute for me to describe the shape?
Oh yeah, we've got 2 more minutes and then we'll take a quick break.
Okay, perfect. So the courtroom's like diamond shaped essentially. So the judge is in a corner, the door is in the other corner, the jury's in a corner, and then the media is in a corner. And so because the jury is in a corner, they're looking like diagonally at the witness so they can all see the witnesses' faces. Whereas in the other room, it was square and the jurors were parallel to where a juror would sit. So it has resolved that issue. But then the other issue it created is that the families now have to decide what 10 of them go into court every day. Media only gets 10 people in court. And something I noticed today, or it finally dawned on me today, is that the location of that courtroom as well is on the corner of the courthouse, street side. We have to stop frequently because there are sirens going by.
Oh, wow. And it can be very loud.
Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. So it's been a really interesting switch. Yeah.
All right. Interesting. All right. Let's take a quick break, Kristina. And when we come back, we'll talk to you about who has testified so far and what nuggets we should know were significant moving forward. Now that we're winding down the first 2 weeks, we're talking to Kristina Rex, our WBZ reporter on the Karen Read trial. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. We're talking with WBZ reporter Kristina Rex, who is our reporter in the courtroom every day as the Karen Read trial continues at the courthouse in Dedham. And Kristina, I was just asking if we could talk about the witnesses who have testified so far and any significant moments or big pieces of information that stood out to you. The first witness was John O'Keefe's brother.
Yeah. The first 2 witnesses were John O'Keefe's family, his brother and that brother's wife. And so the prosecution clearly started with the family. And what they really did was just humanize John. They talked about the tragedy this family has been through. John's sister passed away of cancer about a decade ago, and then her husband died as well, orphaning their 2 children. John took them in and became their caretaker, changed up his whole life, moved to Canton, became a father overnight. And that was a lot of what we talked about with the family, really humanizing the victim in this case. And then just a little tidbit as well from the sister-in-law about a fight between John and Karen while they were on vacation in Aruba about a month before his death, when Karen actually reached out to the sister-in-law and accused John of kissing another woman in the hotel lobby. So that was the first and frankly only actual fight between the couple that we have heard in testimony. And so that was, the beginning. The defense didn't even cross-examine those two witnesses.
Right.
And I've spoken with legal analysts to say, why would you? You don't want to make the family of the victim look bad.
Sure. And I have to jump just to testimony we heard this week yesterday when we saw the first video inside the bars where they were in Canton that night. I think people might have been given the impression that these people were very intoxicated and that we were going to see people like falling down drunk. And that was not the case at all. And there was no fight between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe that night. And it appeared that they were.
No. Yeah. In fact, we saw a video of Karen showing up at the bar, them hugging, and John rubbing her back. And then all of the witnesses who testified yesterday really testified about them being affectionate and very sweet towards each other all night. Yeah. Nobody has testified that they fought out at the bars that night, and nobody has testified that they were visibly drunk. People testified that John was drinking beers and Karen was drinking some clear liquid in a glass with lime that they assumed was vodka. But nobody, even the bartender... Them.
Yeah.
Nope. Even the bartender who served them, nobody said they seemed strong.
They were fine. Okay. So going back after the O'Keefe family members testified, anybody else from the middle or end of last week or anything else that you want viewers to hear about?
I think I can describe them in in groups, categories. Yes. So after the O'Keefe family, it was first responders who came to the scene that morning. And that was a mix between EMTs and paramedics who responded and tried to save John, and Canton police who responded and canvassed the crime scene. They were not necessarily in that order, but we heard from them for days and days and days of testimony from those people.
And the collection of evidence with the red Solo cups is what really stood out to me.
Yes, to a lot of people. So I think on the prosecution side, the reason a lot of them were testifying was to Karen's demeanor being hysterical. And many of them testified that she said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. In those moments when they responded after John's body was discovered. On the flip side, the defense poked a lot of holes in evidence collection in that case, and it's complicated. So there's some things you have to remember. This was a really, really, really snowy night. I mean, I remember this evening. Canton police doesn't usually investigate their own homicide scenes. State police usually takes over. But when a Canton police officer testified that when he called CPAC, the unit that would usually come investigate, they rejected the call initially. And so as a result, Canton police had to canvass that crime scene. They testified that they didn't necessarily have the materials with them. Plus, it was a snowstorm. So they went to a fellow Canton police officer's house that was right there near the scene, borrowed Solo cups and a Stop and Shop bag, and scooped up snowy blood in 6 Solo cups, brought it back to the station in a Stop and Shop bag. I think anybody watching that can see that that's not the typical way that police collect evidence.
They were not clean evidence bags.
No, no.
Yeah.
And then there's one other thing about the EMTs who responded that was kind of a little bit of drama, which was firefighter McLaughlin, who testified to the younger woman. She testified about responding to the scene, about allegedly hearing Karen, suggest that she had hit John O'Keefe.
Right.
And then the defense tried to impeach her or show a conflict of interest by showing that she was actually friends with Caitlin Albert, a resident of that home, the daughter. Okay. And she said, no, we're not friends. We're just acquaintances with mutual friends. And the defense crossed that by showing social media pictures that puts them together. The defense this week now, that was last week. This week, the defense has asked the judge if they can bring her back on the stand because they believe she perjured herself. They say there's many more pictures and that she does have a friendship with this woman. We do not have a decision from the judge yet on whether or not she'll be brought back to the stand or if any of those social media pictures will be admitted. So that's kind of something hanging in the air.
Interesting. And then today, this is when the first Albert testified. And this speaks to the fact that this is one of these kind of big families in town. Everybody knows there are a lot of them. They're in a lot of positions. And
big families in town, 7 kids.
How did that questioning go?
Okay, so these were the Alberts who were out drinking with the group at the bar that night, but testified that they did not go back to the after party. So still, we have not heard from anyone who was at that house that night.
Who was at that house.
So this is more so about their interactions around that night, how they found out that John had passed away the following morning, which they did very shortly after. And then for the defense side, this is when they started to attempt to paint that cover-up picture that we've heard them talk about. Like you said, the Albert family is a big family, 7 kids. Okay, one of them's a Canton police officer, another one's a Boston police officer, another one of them owns a local pizza shop. they've lived in Canton their entire lives. In fact, 34 Fairview Road, which Brian Albert owned at the time of this alleged crime, was actually their childhood home.
So that's where they all grew up.
That's where they all grew up.
Hmm.
So, this is like a lifelong Canton family.
Mhm.
The Chris Albert, who testified, was just like, yeah, everybody knows us. We know everybody. But the defense was like, so you're friends with the police chief and you are friendly with the state trooper who's the lead investigator.
Hmm.
There was even a line of questioning of, you and your brothers would protect each other, right? Wouldn't you want to protect each other and have each other's backs? Starting to hint towards that cover-up narrative. So that was a lot of what we heard of today.
But again, carefully, not as dramatically as we've heard before.
Exactly. Even a lot of those questions were objected to and the objections were sustained. So the jurors don't get to
explore
use
that further.
Right.
And who is coming up next to wrap up?
Julie Albert will be back on the stand in the morning.
Okay.
She still has to finish her cross-examination.
Chris Albert's wife.
Yes, Chris Albert's wife. We don't know who is next. But just based on the order testimony has been going, I think we can naturally assume that we're moving towards people who were at 34 Fairview that night.
Right. We're going to start focusing in on people who were out with them and went back into the house.
Right. Because now we've moved from the people who were out with them, who maybe were the least connected to them, down to those who were the most connected. The logical next step is to go to the people who were in that house that night. So I think that's what we're expecting next.
Interesting. And you can follow Kristina on X at Kristina Rex, WBZ. Right?
Yep.
Is that right?
It's just Kristina Rex, no WBZ.
Sorry.
It's in my bio.
Sorry, at Kristina Rex. And of course, we're streaming the trial every day on WBZ.com. You can get that also on Pluto TV or the CBS News app. And Kristina, you've been doing a great job for us.
Thank you.
So that people know, Kristina is a law student herself. So this must be fascinating to be inside the courtroom, learning so much in the classroom and at work for you. But we really appreciate your expertise and your great job reporting on this trial. So we'll do this every week now to give people kind of an update of how testimony has gone. All right, Kristina, thanks so much. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paula. Bye.